be a creed. Wow. What a great saying. What a great way to train. Welcome back, fellow fitness professionals and self-trainers or people who are interested in training more effectively and safely. As you know, this series is a series of videos designed to evaluate the effectiveness and the safety of common weight training exercises. And today what we're going to be looking at is the upright row. Oh yes, so one of my old favourites when I was a young Kman bodybuilder. I used to do the upright row, and my bodybuilder used to do it with barbells and cables. Yes, I did. And the reason why I used to do it was because I thought it would build a lot of thickness up here in the shoulders, then the traps would pop up here, and I get the nickname of Pearl. You know why they call me Pearl? Because after Pearl necklace, because my traps would be so big it looked like I didn't have any neck. Yeah, so the upright row, let's have a look at the effectiveness and the safety of that exercise, the one which I used to do a lot when I was younger, and you are either doing yourself or used to do it or contemplating doing it in your weight training program. So let's look at the 5 steps that we've already discussed on evaluating this exercise. So the first one we have to take into account is, what is the goal? Why does the client, or why do you want to do the upright row? Is it because you want to build mass or definition or tone? And when you look at those terms, you have to look at all of those terms from an anatomical point of view. For example, what does mass really mean? Well, mass means you're building muscle or muscle hypertrophy. If you're looking at tone, what does that really mean? Tone means, it looks tone, means you've got a little bit of muscle there, or a lot of muscle, one or the other, but you've got no fat over the top. It gives you that appearance of being firm or toned. So there's no real exercise that tones a muscle, because the muscle's always toned. The only difference is whether there's fat on it, or too much or too little fat, depending on, will give the appearance whether it's toned or not. Or definition really means how much fat's on it. Or striations means there's no fat on it. So just be aware of when you come across these common benefits, you know, mass and toned and firm and striated and all sorts of stuff. You look at it, what does that really mean from a tangible point of view? Not just, you know, a catch cry that people throw out there and then attach that catch cry onto an exercise and join the two together, and then people think that that exercise gives that, but it actually doesn't when you evaluate it from an anatomical and a physiological point of view. But I'm going to guess most people do the upright row because they want to develop a bit of muscle definition or size or shape across in the shoulders, which basically means the deltoids and the trapezius, and obviously parts of the biceps and the triceps. So number 1 is, what is the goal? And that way that's going to define and direct you in your future evaluation of this exercise. The next one to consider is safety. So let's have a look at the upright row. Yeah, from here you generally have your hands around about hip distance apart, and then you bring it up to your chin or to your chest. Now some people, you see variations of it where people bring it up to the nose like so, or people just take it up to their shoulders of 90 degrees abduction or parallel to the floor, or people bring it all the way up. People swing with it. So let's look at the basic movement from an anatomical point of view and apply, you know, is it safe on the joints? So let's have a look at the movement. Your arm, your shoulder joint, or your glenohumeral joint, this part here is coming out into shoulder abduction. So that's shoulder abduction going away from the midline. My elbow at the same time of shoulder abducting is flexing. My shoulder position, right, that's the shoulder movement. The glenohumeral shoulder movement is shoulder abduction. The elbow movement is elbow flexion. The shoulder position. So when you look at safety, you look at the position and movement, not just the movement, but also the position that the joint moves in. To get myself into the position for the upright row, my shoulder, my glenohumeral joint is, if that's the anatomical position, I actually medially rotate and abduct. So my shoulder is in this medially rotated, slightly flexed because the bar's in front, so you have a slightly flexed shoulder, a medially rotated shoulder, and the movement is shoulder abduction with elbow flexion. So what does that mean from a joint point of view? Well, we all know that you can take your arm up to 90 degrees of shoulder abduction before the humerus comes into contact with the acromion process. And if you go above that, the scapula has to laterally rotate to keep your humerus going above your head, because it actually comes to a physical articular stop or bony stop in the form of your acromion process. So you've got two bones actually coming into contact, and what runs between those two bones is your tendons of the rotator cuff, particularly the supraspinatus. If I wanted to specifically impinge the supraspinatus, the ideal joint position to do that would be to abduct and medially rotate my shoulder joint. Because when I medially rotate the glenohumeral joint, I rotate the humerus in a way that the supraspinatus sits right on top of the humeral head, or the head of the humerus. And when I go up, that supraspinatus, the tendon, will come in contact with the acromion process, causing an impingement. An impingement is where two bones pinch a tendon in between those two bones. And if I go above my shoulder, then I further impinge it because I'm now compressing on the supraspinatus. So one of the challenges with this movement is that it puts your shoulder in the classic shoulder impingement position. If you look at sports that promote through their actions, and you understand you have to do these actions in certain sports, it's just the way the sport is, that involve shoulder abduction with medial rotation, you will find a large history of shoulder impingement challenges. Personally, I work with the Olympic kayak team, with the Australian Institute of Sport kayak team, and they had the most common shoulder injury was the impingement of their supraspinatus. And the reason for that is because their top arm when they're kayaking is abducting with the paddle, abducting and pushing forward and medially rotating. Abduction, medial rotation. If you look at swimmers such as freestyle butterfly, abduction, medial rotation, the classic position for impingement. So if you do that in a repetitive way, kayaking with a bit of force going through the water, or swimming, then you're going to find there's going to be a significant high risk of shoulder impingement, and that could lead to shoulder tendonitis, or tendonitis particularly of your supraspinatus, supraspinatus tendinopathy, where it wears it down, and impingement, inflammation and pain. If you look at other sports, I was involved in Major League Baseball, pitchers, a lot of the throwers, particularly in the outfield, when they pitch, the arm is abducted, and as they throw the ball, it's medially rotating. So again, the most common injury or surgery that was done on baseball pitchers was supraspinatus tendonitis and supraspinatus tears or tendon tears. So the challenge there could possibly be with the upright row is it puts your shoulder into that medially rotated abducted position with a significant load. It's not like it's a little baseball or a paddle. You start loading it up. So now you're applying a greater force through that joint in a, how can you say, a high risk position. On top of that, with a lot of the time when people are doing the upright row, because the weight's in front, you'll tend to pull your shoulders forward. And when you pull your shoulders forward into this, what we call protracted position, what you're basically doing is you're pulling your acromion process down on top of the humerus head. So what you're doing is you're going to get impingement at a lower range of movement because your scapula is depressed and protracted. That's going to increase the chances for impingement. So when it comes to safety for the upright row, and then if you're out on top of that, people swinging it, then that's going to exaggerate the stresses. And you take it way above here, then that's going to exaggerate it again. Then that's going to increase those stressful forces going through the shoulder joint with your arm or your shoulder joint in that rotated, medially rotated abducted position. And yes, you do get feel in the deltoids, but you're compromising the integrity of the shoulder joint. Now, because I've done lots of sports myself, and I used to do the upright row a lot when I was ignorant on functional anatomy, just me doing this, I can actually feel the pain in my glenohumeral joint due to the wear and tear, degeneration, osteoarthritis that I now have in my shoulder joint. So from a safety point of view, I wouldn't give it a high rating. It would certainly be in the bottom half of exercise selections. There are lots of worse ones than this one, but certainly, you can make it safer, I suppose, by slowing it down and not going above your 90 degrees, but you're still in that medially rotated, impinged, abducted position. The next question, as we already know, is it functional? And that's an interesting one. People say, well, you pick things up all the time. It says, yes, we do pick things up, but I can't remember the last time I picked up my, I'm in Australia at the moment, I flew over from New Zealand, and when I was on the carousel at the airport and I picked up my bag, I certainly didn't pick it up like that and walk off. Okay, I've got my bag now. You tend to pick things up with your elbow in, close to your centre of gravity, and you pick it up this way. If I'm going to pick up my briefcase, not my briefcase, my carry case, I'll pick it up here. I'm not going to pick it up there. Before I left New Zealand, it was interesting, my pig Gucci, she moved, I have in my paddock where my donkeys and my alpacas and llamas are, I have a big bathtub and I fill it up with water. And Gucci's actually moved it. She was scratching her back, and you know, I've got a 140 kilogram pig, so it doesn't take much effort to push the bathtub around. And I had to move it. And when I was getting down to lift the bathtub and shift it around, I was thinking, what I'm not doing is I'm not doing this to lift the bathtub. I'm not abducting, merely rotating, grabbing the bathtub and lifting up, because that would hurt, and it's also a weak position for my shoulder joint. So from a function point of view, what I was doing, how to lift the bathtub, as I do with my suitcase, is I have my hands this way and I'm lifting it this way, because that's a strong position and it's close in, it's away from abduction. My arm is actually laterally rotated, which takes my supraspinatus out from underneath my chromium process. So it's a safe position, and it feels strong and it feels safe and it feels secure when this feels quite insecure. You know, if I'm playing up, not that I would, if I was playing up in a nightclub and the bouncer was going to say, hey, get that little troublemaker out of here, if he was going to take me out, he would grab my arm and he would put my shoulder in that position, say, out you go. What position is that? That's called abduction and medial rotation. That hurts. When I was doing judo in my younger years, and I was a judo Australian champion, we used to get people to arm bars, and a couple of the arm locks that created pain in people's shoulders where they had to tap out were putting their arm in this position. That's how you get thrown out of a nightclub. So why would we train people in that position that is used as an arm lock to get someone out of a nightclub, and certainly not used in lifting things anyway? Because when you do lift things that are heavy, you don't lift them this way. So I'm going to pick this up. You lift it this way, because it's a stronger position, a more effective position, and a safer position to put force through the shoulder joint. As we've already discussed, when you look at different forces and stresses across joints, particularly across the shoulder joint, this is a fairly good safe position. When you start doing things out here and then you start actually rotating it this way or rotating it that way, you're positioning your shoulder joint in a compromising position. This position is putting into a dislocated position, and this position is putting into a impingement position. This position is not too bad, but if I'm going to be lifting something, I'd be better off keeping my elbow in nice and tight. Now, certainly, from a functional point of view, when you think about it, it's not that functional, because I don't see many people lifting things up with like this. I don't pick up things and go, okay, I'm off. I tend to pick things up like this. If I'm going to pick something up, like something heavy like a bucket, it'll be here. It won't be here, because that tends to hurt. If it doesn't hurt, it probably will hurt down the track. So the goal is working the deltoids. That's the goal. Is the safe? Well, very questionable, probably on the bottom half. From a safety point of view, you long term, I'm not talking we'll blow your shoulder out in one workout. I'm saying if you do this regularly for many, many decades, because when you brush your teeth, you're going to do that for the rest of your life. When you do weight training or strength training, I recommend you do it for the rest of your life to maintain your bone integrity, maintain muscle density, maintain your metabolism and functionality in life. So think of an exercise, not the short-term benefit you're going to get from it, but the long-term quality and value you'll get from the exercise. Because as soon as your shoulder starts going down the track where it starts to degenerate, you start to get impingement, tendonitis, tendinopathy, pain, and then you find when those conditions, or osteoarthritis in the shoulder joint, then you're not going to be doing any strength training across the shoulder joint in any plane of movement, let alone the plane of movement in the frontal plane doing a upright row. So safety, big question mark. You can make it safer, but it's like trying to make cigarette smoking safer. They just don't draw back as much. Just rather than going, just do a, there you go, that will extend the longevity of your lungs until you get lung cancer. So rather than getting lung cancer at 40, you now be able to extend it to 50. So be careful when you look at adapting, say compromising joint positions during exercise and trying to make an unsafe position safer, because it's still an unsafe position, but you're doing it safer. That doesn't make any sense. If anything, you will still lead to the same result. It just may take a bit longer to get there. So use the great common sense between these ears of yours to look at the long term and not just the short term. The next question is there a benefit? Well, the short answer is yes, of course it's a benefit. It works the muscle. You feel it in the muscle. If you've got healthy joints, you won't feel it in the joints. If you don't have healthy joints, you feel it in the joints. If you have healthy joints, you feel it in the muscle until you deteriorate the joints, and then you start feeling it in the joints. So I don't want you to get to my age at 50 and start to have joint challenges that started to occur without you realizing them when you were 20, because you were loading up an inappropriate biomechanical anatomical position that was compromising to the joint. So yes, it does work the deltoid, it does work the traps. If you shrug at the top, it works the traps to stabilize the scapula, and I won't go too much into that. But it does work all this area, but the challenge is there is a compromising, an erosion effect or a degeneration effect on the integrity of the glenohumeral joint. And particularly this joint here, it is quite sensitive because it has a very shallow cavity in the glenoid cavity. It's a ball and socket synovial joint, therefore it's lots of movement. So you really want to look after it, because it's very important in life, because this is how we live our life, and you don't want to be having challenges with that later in your life. Even though you got short-term benefits when you're younger. So is there a benefit? The next ultimate question is there a better exercise that will still work your deltoids, if that's your target, in a safe way? Well, of course there is, and you know that. There's not a shoulder movement that you do in any plane of movement that does not involve the deltoid. So look at movement patterns that put your joints in a strong, safe position where you can lift a strong, safe weight. So make sure you pick an exercise. Now, if I'm doing, say, a bench press, right? Guess what? I'm working the deltoids. The deltoid goes right across the glenohumeral joint. It's a stabilizer, a functional stabilizer, assistant movement, lots of movement as well, of any movement. Whether it be, some people want to do these movements, but any of the core exercise, like a bench press, you're getting lots of deltoid work because it works in cooperatively with your rotator cuff to keep the head of the humerus into the glenoid cavity. If I'm doing a row, like a seated row or dumbbell row, I'm still working my deltoid in a different movement direction through extension rather than in a bench press, but through flexion or horizontal extension. So if I'm doing, say, a pushing movement and a pulling movement, I'm working my entire deltoid. And the good news with that, in these movement patterns, they're safe, and you're also in a biomechanically a strong position, because your arm it's not medially rotated, it's not overly laterally rotated, it's in that strong position where I can lift good weight, where I'll be doing dumbbells or I'll be doing barbells. So rowing, pushing. But you don't necessarily have to go into those planes of movement where your shoulder is in a weak position, such as shoulder presses or upright rows, where not only is it weaker, but it also unstable or impinging. Unstable, impinging. Particularly when the weight's in front, we tend to exaggerate that by pulling your shoulders into this poked, necked, rounded shouldered, kyphotic position, which actually even exaggerates the impinging effect on your supraspinatus. If you wanted to target, a lifting movement, then just get a dumbbell and do your rows this way, because your elbows are in close to your body. It's away from impingement, because impingement occurs when your shoulders are abducted. Your arm in this position is actually in a neutral position. It's not merely rotated. If anything, it's laterally rotated. Not completely laterally rotated, but enough where the supraspinatus is out from underneath the acromion process. So you're not going to get any impingement or any joint pain through this movement. And you're still working if you want to work your deltoids in conjunction with a little bit of elevation with your scapula, then this is going to be the good movement. Like a bent over row, you can be really bent over, or you can get a bit more upright to get that movement if that's the movement pattern that you want to target for whatever reason. It might be for a sport-specific reason, a functional reason. But that's a bit more functional, because if I pick something up, I'm going to pick something like bucket up, I'll pick it up like this, and I'll put it up onto the couch. I want to pick it up like this and put it onto the couch. So people will say, hey, it's very functional, but when you think about it in detail, from an anatomical and biomechanical point of view, it's not as functional as you first think. So there are better exercises, which are your good core bench presses, dumbbell presses, dumbbell rows, seated rows, maybe dips, and chin-ups. They work all this great deltoid, because all of those movements are big exercises that get big results for all the muscles, because you can't work the big muscles without going through the little muscles, which are your assistant movers and your stabilizers. So the upright row, overall rating I would give it would probably be about 4.5 out of 10 if you do it safely. And obviously 4.5 is not good. If you do it unsafely, that will go south from 4.5 down to 3.5. And some people I see, when they do it and they're swinging, it gets down to a 1 or a 2. But even if you do it really well, it would probably never go, in my analysis of it, from an effectiveness point of view and a safety point of view, I wouldn't give it anything more than a 5. So the question for you is 5 justifiable enough for you to do it for its benefit, and also the safety aspect that it could cause long-term compromise of your joints. And understand, as people get more mature in their age, they're the things they're going to be experiencing more: the osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, capsulitis, degeneration, impingement, tendonitis, all those challenges. Let's not add to people's aging conditions. Weight training is supposed to increase your quality of life for the long term, not demise it or compromise it over the term. So go out there, do some good safe exercises, and be smart enough to know that you don't have to try to find an isolating movement pattern to train the deltoids, because the deltoids don't work in isolation. They virtually embrace the entire glenohumeral joint, and they work in all movement patterns to stabilise that joint, so your bigger muscles can work far more effectively. So if your bigger muscles are getting a great workout, your deltoids are getting an even greater workout, because they have to hold this joint into place safely so you can work those bigger muscles. Live safely.